by the 9 and 4, I welcome you to this, The Tale Thus Far, wrapping up a season's storyline in one compilation. I do hope you enjoy. I remember the journey our family took when we moved to the lawless lands of Solaris. I was just a child at the time, and the passage was less a relocation and far more an exploration of Jamamar, as my parents had told me so often during the trip. For 5 years we traveled the world, saw the grand cities of Avlin and Deepgate, watched the dances of the Dragwa celebrating across the dunes of the Isles of Mist, and many other wonders in those years. My parents, father being a smith and mother a leather worker, traded their wares and services as we traveled, earning coin and friendships in equal measure. By the time we arrived in the port of Polaron, I had seen 10 summers, and was awestruck as the ship approached the city. Even from miles away, the Grand Colosseum and streams of flying conveyances and creatures could be seen. Arriving at the port and unloading our wagon and other possessions using the lifts and cables of the docks, we were joined soon by the brothers, a pair of Dragwa that we had met while on the Isle of Mist. They too were setting out to find their own place in the world, and had joined with us to share resources and skills, as while they were not rich, they were extremely capable hunters, and with their ability to keep pace with horses at a full gallop, they were more than a welcome addition to our trek. The great and famous Polaron, Justique, the winged sky dancer proclaimed as he drifted down from the ship's deck, having jumped over the side to softly glide to where we were securing our things. "Doth, wait for me," his brother, Lawson, voiced as he hopped over the railing, sliding about halfway down the side of the ship before bounding off of it in a somersault and landing next to his brother. He lacked his brother's rings, but was able to run and leap as well as his brother could fly or dive. "Boys, settle down and act like you aren't fresh-shelled." Father was stern, but jovial in his admonishment of them. While the both of them stood nearly 7 foot tall, they were only a year or two older than myself, and had come to defer to father or mother when called to task. "No matter what you're born as," Justique had once said when I'd asked him about it, "an angry parent will always be one of the scariest creatures in the realms. Don't you doubt it." Where are we going first? There was so much to see and do. I had a flyer with a map of the city and places already marked out, zeal and excitement clear in my eyes. "Well, you're going with the brothers, as your mother and I have to do some trading and get the final sets of supplies we are going to need for the last leg of our journey." Father shared a pointed glance with both of the brothers and my mother, all of whom shared a sly grin. Looking up to the brothers, I couldn't hold my curiosity. "Okay then, where are we going, Justique?" He set a finger on the end of his chin, seemingly deep in thought. "Well, I guess we could start at the museum. Perhaps the Grand Library." His line of thought interrupted not by my growing impatience, but by a blow from his brother. "Doth, not today. This is Polaron, the Colosseum. It has to be our first stop." Carried forth by the sounds of a gleeful child, we spent the next few hours seeing some of the most talented warriors in the realms fight to the false death, as the magic of the Colosseum saved the lives of all combatants at the very last moment, moving them to safety. Following the fights, we toured the Grand Zoo, seeing the various beasts and animals from across the realm. After that, we went to the Carnival of Amazements. It did not disappoint. As the sun began to set and the moons rose, we found ourselves outside of a short, large building. Calor's Bar, Eatery, and Entertainment was on the sign, and a flow of people going in and out. Looking at the slip of paper he had referenced multiple times throughout the day, Justique's grin became a wide smile, full of mischief. This is the place. Mother and Father should be waiting for us. We took too long at the carnival. I hope they're not mad. His voice was, if anything, twice as filled with mirth. With that, we walked through the doors and onto a large platform. The bar itself some 20 or so feet below, with dozens of tables and booths spread around, most with occupants. Along the far wall from the entrance, a bar stretched over 100 feet, sloping up and down to accommodate for customers of any height or stature, with stations for servers, and a rail system in the overhang above conveying hot food from the kitchens in the back. Far to the right, a large stage with curtains closed stood. For a moment I wondered how any performance could be enjoyed across such a course of revelry and drunken happiness. Then I remembered how the seats in the Coliseum made it seem as if we were no more than a dozen yards from the action, despite being hundreds of feet away. Such tricks could allow for even a soft speaker to be clearly heard by all those that chose to pay attention. So lost in the scene before me I jumped when Lassen lifted me onto his shoulders to give me a better view. It was then I became aware that Justique was speaking to the man before us, handing him a card of some sort. The man, a Dragois supremacist, having both the large musculature of a featherfoot like Lassen and the powerful wings of a sky dancer like Justique, stood a head taller than either and just under eye to eye with me perched on Lassen's shoulders. He looked at me somberly. Greetings, young man. The man's low rumble began. I hope you understand I do not want any trouble out of you. The word's serious nature betrayed by a glint in his eyes. I then did something I had seen the brothers do to each other. I reached out with 2 fingers and softly bapped his nose, holding my hand in place after. I'm not afraid of you, I enjoined as I did so gleefully. For a moment his eyes grew cold and I saw his lip curled, and suddenly I remember realizing he could open his mouth and take half my arm without a thought. But the moment passed and his eyes filled with amusement as he took a half step back to bow. Of course you won't. I see to your authority and bravery, young master. It was only as Lassen exhaled I had realized he'd been holding his breath. As we proceeded past the man descending down the stairs, he asked in a low tone, Where in the dunes did you learn that? You guys, of course. My answer was as simple as it was truthful. The sound that elicited from the brothers told me that they had not been aware of my proximity at those times. Curious considering how the Dragois have preternatural senses, able to sense a leaf in the wind floating past them while blindfolded. Justique was the first to be able to speak. Okay, Katheon, we will explain it later, but until then, do not do that again. The soft force he was able to intone in that was nothing compared to the frozen fire in his eyes. I'd only ever seen that look once before, and at that point, I was almost killing myself hunting for cow seeds, ignorant to the fact that the plants that bore them were toxic to the touch. I would not be ignoring this warning. We found Mother and Father without further incident, laughing over a half-empty bottle of wine. Ducked you to long enough, what'd you do? Give the boy a tour of the entire city, even the sewers? Father wasn't even able to make the accusation with a straight face. Mother, similarly, seemed very pleased. Of course not. We only made sure to go to those places you told us not to go to, of course. Houses of ill repute and the like. Justique, Lassen, and myself sat down at the table, the incident at the door forgotten for the time being. Within moments, a server had appeared, taken our orders, and was returning with our drinks. We made a very good turnover on those last sets of tools and bags, Father began, beaming. Enough to spend a little extra on the homestead wagon. Everyone will be getting their own room. The brothers and I were elated, and the good news hadn't ended there either. We were able to secure a grand workshop wagon as well. So no getting out of work yet, you slouch, Mother was adding, as she struck softly in Father's chest before leaning into him, smiling. We have gear for both a forge and a tannery. We enjoyed a full meal, with roasts and sweet vegetables filling me as much as I thought possible, only to have everything go seemingly quiet as a small cake was set before me. I looked on confused, to the amusement of all. It was my 11th birthday. I hadn't thought to say anything. None of them had in the last few weeks on the ship, and I hadn't wanted to burn them for trying to arrange a celebration. But of course they wouldn't let the day go unmarked. My eyes must have shown the fact that I had caught on, because the brothers began to sing a birthday carol, joined by my mother and father, as well as many others in the bar, only for all the voices to go silent as a mighty, yet warm voice sounded in the last refrains. To you. The crowd parted as I turned to the voice, a small, elderly gnome. He strode forward, leaning on a cane of wood. For such a brave man, I couldn't not wish him the happiest of birthdays. The gnome began. Allow me to introduce myself. I am Kalor, owner of this fine ancestral establishment. He then proceeded to pull a platinum coin from my ear. Seeing my eyes widen in amazement, he held the coin between his thumb and forefinger. This coin is my gift to you, young man, but I offer you a chance to make it more. All it will take is a keen eye, and you can have 10 more coins of platinum. But fail, and only a coin of gold will you take. What say you? If mischief had a face, it was on this man. He knew something I didn't, and was aware that I was aware of it as well. As he leaned with one arm on his cane close to me, he studied me as I thought it through. I don't know why I felt the need to prove myself, but with a stern look and all of the base a 11-year-old can muster, I answered. Not afraid of your man at the door? Not scared of you. What's the game? He smiled and simply looked at me, beginning to explain. Follow the coin and tell me where it is. Simple as can be. As the coin slid into the palm of his hand and his hands became a blur, the coin's edge flashing out as he flipped it into the air or rolled it around his fingers after catching it. He did this for a few moments before flipping the coin with one more loud pling, before catching it and leaning forward on his cane, his 2 hands closed and before me. Where is the coin? His eyes were searching my face, not giving anything away. A moment later, as I considered where I thought I had seen it gone, my thoughts were interrupted. Perhaps you would like to consult your brothers? He softly taunted me. Of course we know which hand it's in. We are Drago. It's not a fair contest. Lassen retorted. At the moment he did, the corner of the old man's smile lifted, and I knew where the coin was. It's not in his hand. It's between his arm and the cane. I said it knowing I was right in the bottom of my soul. The old man's smile confirmed it before he'd even lifted his arm to reveal it was there, eliciting both a shocked gasp from the brothers and a chuckle from my mother. The entire bar, on the other hand, exploded into applause and laughter, cheering me on my success. You have a sharp eye, and a deal is a deal. The man took the coin and slipped it into a pouch with a gem-laden clasp. He handed the pouch to me, heavy with the weight of my winnings. When I grasped the pouch, the gems set in the clasp glowed for a moment. I must have reacted, as the old man was very quick to explain. No need to worry. That is just the purse's tuning to you. It's a kind of magic, you see. Only you can retrieve the coin or any currency you place within it. He smiled a bit wider. Have a wonderful birthday and safe travels on the rest of your journey. He looked at my parents and brothers as he finished. May you find yourselves a wonderful place to settle down, and I hope to see you grace my establishment again. He finished with a soft bow, turned, and seemed to melt right into the crowd. The next morning, as Mother was gathering our wagons and beasts of burden, Father and the brothers took me to the stables to spend some of my winnings on a Prakon, a powerful steed of Dragwa origin. By the time we had met Mother at the gates of the city, I was already getting familiar with Floss. He was only a juvenile, but for my size, and the added benefits of bonding to this reptilian mount as we grew up together, he was a perfect fit. For the next month and a few weeks, we traveled from Polaron, crossing the mountains, and making our way through the vast forests of Domnitra, eventually entering into the southern plains, unclaimed and thus the lawless lands. For another week we traveled, looking for where we should set up our new home. Justique would fly to help scout the lay of the land, and eventually finding where we would set up, near a small creek and several smaller forests, without any sign of nearby threats. We arrived at the site near midday, and spent at least an hour choosing the exact arrangement of the wagons and the buildings that they would soon become. After we had decided and lowered the wagons to the ground, Father sent the brothers and I to one of the nearby forests to gather wood. We'd only been gone for a few hours, gathering not only wood, but a number of fruits and berries we had discovered within the forest, when we heard and felt it. A mighty roar that shook the woods and my bones. As the brothers were recovering, I was already off in a full dash towards the source of the noise. It was the sight. Mother and Father were in danger. So focused on my path and running, I'd almost didn't hear Lassen and False race up behind me, with the former lifting me onto the back of the ladder in a smooth motion. Impressive, he said as he was dashing. Now stay behind Just and I and trust False. Here we go. And with that, Lawson shot off at his full speed. False jolted off behind him, carrying me along. Justique had already taken to the air, the canopy of the woods not thick enough to make that an issue. What had taken us hours of strolling we cost in minutes, as False jumped and sprinted through the forest, following the path that Lawson took nearly step for step. As we cleared the edge of the woods, we could smell the acrid smell of burning flesh. Minutes later, we arrived at the site. The house was 2 stories tall, as was the barn and the workshop. Near the barn is where the land was melted, still glowing red hot. Scanning the horizon, I saw the creature responsible. A winged form flying away, talons gripping some of the beasts of burden we had brought with us. Without a thought, I led False in a sprint near the still smoldering patch, snatching from the ground Father's rifle from where it had landed. I grew more mindlessly enraged as I realized it was still slick with his blood. I pulled Fausto's up and hopped off to set the rifle up on a railing in front of the barn, using it to steady my shot. A ballistic rifle, as Father called it, had a much longer range than most weapons, but required great skill to use effectively at anywhere near those ranges. That day, rage was required to suffice for skill, as I pulled the trigger and felt myself launched backwards by the weapon's loud, angry bark for vengeance. Looking up from my back, for long moments it seemed my rage was as useless as I was beginning to feel. But then a plume of light blossomed as the beast displayed its displeasure at the blow I just struck. Spirits lifted, I scrambled to my feet to reload and continue my assault. The brothers caught up to me and were staring as I tried to move faster. As I brought up the weapon to line up my next shot, Jastique snatched it from my hands.
By the Dunes, you've made them proud, but I won't let you get yourself killed. It's by the Grace of luck alone you landed that shot, and you made it a telling blow. Look, it's lying lower now. But even like that, it's far more than any of us could deal with if it were to come back.
As I began to protest, Lassen picked me up and carried me bodily, fighting and kicking, screaming and crying, into the house. We ate quietly that night, the fireplace bright and loud in the silence that was our morning. Lassen had done an inventory, and only the animals were gone. The tools and equipment were all still intact. With them, we were able to plant our first crops and tange the hides of our game, as well as being able to maintain things. The first winter would have been so much harder if we had not had the extra rooms to stack so much wood in, as a heavy blizzard kept us from being able to gather or even exit the house for weeks. As long as we had wood for the fireplace, the pantry would have the basics, and the crops and game we had stored beforehand would definitely keep. Thank the Nine Wings for simple things, right? It was the third morning after that first blizzard that we met Miska and Ogman. We had forced our way out of the house and had just managed to clear the porch of snow when we saw the lights of their wagon far on the early morning horizon. By the time we had cleared some modest paths, their wagon had reached the edge of our plot, demarcated as it was by simple metal poles, barely sticking above the snows. We can now see how they made such good time in this snow as high as it was. The front of their wagon had a heat emitter of some sort, melting and evaporating the snow in their path. That is also when it became clear that they were Celestians. Their steeds were made of a smooth gray metal, crystal eyes glowing softly as their heads shifted slowly about. The one holding the reins called out to us as we approached. Greetings. By chance, if we were to offer our services in clearing this snow, could we stay a few days to tend and mend our own? This storm was far more stressful than we anticipated. We are happy to offer a full cord of fuel logs to cover the strain, if that would help. The brothers' eyes went wide, for a single fuel log was equivalent to an entire day worth of energy from a small bonfire. An entire cord would keep us in power for months, if not years spent wisely. But there was an issue. Mother and Father wouldn't hear of it. I began striding to the wagon still. You help clear the snow, and you are free to stay as long as you want, as long as you help do what needs done. We have the room, and we have enough wood. I could hear Lanson choke back an argument as Jastique landed behind him, cuffing him solidly.
Boy's right. You're welcome to stay. However, Kath, if he has a log for today, it would speed things up quite a bit without having to keep running back to keep the fire going. We have a lot of land to clear. This is a reasonable middle ground. Yes?
Justique had become a master of compromise, having just been stuck the last 3 weeks with his brother and I in the house. And it was a lapse in host manners not to accept at least a token of appreciation from a guest, and mother and father had always been such sticklers for those duties and manners between hosts and their guests. The man, who I thought was initially in a damaged state, as he was only a torso, lifted off the bench of the wagon, floating on little jets of energy as he came down to me, with a single fuel log wrapped in a thick paper.
Reasonable indeed, sir, if the young master agrees.
He extended a metal limb, a round cord of sectioned rings, with 3 smaller extensions of cord with rings binding him tight, holding the log out to me as he descended. I took the log. As he set it into my hands, he retracted his limb with an audible whir. The sound reminded me of a toy spring winding up. It made me grin. Of course. Please, let's get your wagon to the barn. I'll get this into the fireplace and we can get started. How many of there are you? Just the 2 of you and your steeds? I had heard of Celestians, of course, and even seen them at work on one of the ships we'd booked passage on, but I had never spoken to one, and realized how little I actually knew about him. My node mate, Mistka, and our 8 embers, Mist 1 through 4, and Og 1 through 4. As if summoned, 4 sets of Celestians hopped out of the wagon, looking about mechanically before they started to begin clearing the snow. Presumably Mistka, with a full humanoid form, began to tut and direct these embers about their work. I am Ogmen, by the way. And you, fine masters, whom do we thank for the shelter?
I am Lanson. This is my brother Justique.
His brusque tone made it clear he was not happy with this situation, and that made him snappy. However, his next words nearly made me trip as I was heading into the house to load the fuel log into the fireplace.
And the master of this home is Katheon. He is a little brother in charge.
Whatever threat he was about to level, Justique killed with his typical smooth style.
Well, Ogmen, my friend, Lawson must like you. He only starts in like that on those he has a good feeling about.
The smooth warmth in his tone was undercut only slightly by the look he was giving Lassen, before Lassen smiled and raised his hands in surrender, which was met by with laughter by our guests. We then spent the bulk of the day clearing snow and making sure everything was in order. The barn had gone mostly unused, as the animals it was intended for never got to use it, except for Phallus, and he spent more time in the house with me than the barn. Quite the spoiled little pragon. The workshop, however, was in better order, and both Mistka and Ogmen showed great interest in the equipment and inquired if they could use it in their own mendings. These are quality systems, Master. Ogmen, enough with the whole master thing. Katheon, if you must be formal. Of course, sir. However, these systems are of impeccable quality. Are you trained in their use and function? Mother and father both made sure I was at least aware of the basics. I'm not too bad with the forge. Father never shooed me out at least, chuckling as I lifted a book from a shelf near the drafting board. You're free to use the forge and all its gear. But this book, I tapped the cover. It contains a number of advanced designs Father intended to make once we got here. I'd like you to review them and give me a breakdown of which ones you think are of immediate need and which ones you think could be put off. Any designs you can't work out, bring them to me. There's sure to be at least some erratic designs included. He took the book with a smile on his digital little face. Of course, sir. I can have that for you by the time you and your brothers have finished. dinner. Ogman tilted his head to the door a moment before 4 of the embers had walked in. By their colors and marks, Og 1 through 4. They were holding a handful of short metal tip stakes and a large ringed disc made of metal and wood. Primary Ogman, objects of unknown designation, seeking protocol clarification. What to do with objects. Where did you find our Jadart set? That should have been on the side of the barn, but that is... I looked out the window to see they must have just finished it. Pristine and cleared. Damn, they were fast. That would have taken us a week to get all that cleared out. Never mind. Jadarts. I am unfamiliar with this activity. Ogman's curiosity was infectious. Oh, it's nothing special. Just the game of darts, with, well, oversized darts or technically undersized javelins. I slowly replied as to the extent of their efforts, and how much we had done in only a day was dawning on me in full. Darts. The linguistic effect is understood. Thank you, sir. Ogman's smile seemed to be a bit wider after the exchange. The game's board seems damaged. Would you like it mended? I nodded assent, and the embers set the darts and board near the forge. I will tend to it tonight. For now, those designs. You should go get food. I detect that the meal is nearing completion. I will attend you with my review shortly. If you pass Miska, could you direct her in this way? I affirmed I would, as I turned my attention to the smell of roast, my hunger asserting itself quite loudly now that I had realized how much work we had actually done. Just as I was returning from clearing the table after our hearty meal and cleaning the dishes, I entered to Miska and Ogman speaking with the brothers. The table I had just cleared was now covered with Father's designs. It brought a smile to my face. It would appear that there are numerous designs that were intended for immediate production, with all materials in stock for their creation. They include a number of items that were clearly intended for you and Sir Katheon. Ogman looked in my direction. As you suspected, sir, many include auratic components. However, those components are, for the most part, already fabricated and in stock. As they were for the most part smaller items, emitters or converters, I would speculate they were built during your trip here.
Father was always busy with something, so that doesn't overly shock me.
Justic had an edge to his voice. Something about this was not to his liking.
You're familiar with auratic designs and their construction?
Miska intoned a response in her soft, crystalline voice. Ogman is not. However, I am. I was installed with a basic understanding of the principles involved and further educated by several flame wielders on our passage from Petonia a few decades ago. Katheon, your father's designs are wonderfully efficient and compact. The 3 of you will be far better off once you are able to use your Lassen crashed into the floor over-tipped in his chair, shaking the room and disrupting everything. That had never happened before. His balance is too good for that. The oddity of it all struck me, until the pieces fell into place like an avalanche, and the resulting conclusion made my blood boil. I turned on my heel and moved with the smooth grace that only overwhelming rage contained can provide. Kath! Lassen shouted as I climbed the stairs and swept into my room for but a moment. before exiting and descending back down the stairs, returning to the room and setting a pyramid-shaped device on the table. Opening the top and pulling out a family heirloom, a glass with the crest of our house, ringed with runes. Between it and its container, I was about to clear the air. I looked at Lassen, who was now seated back up properly. The room was deathly silent. I held out the glass.
Kath, what in the name of?
Drop of blood. Give it, or I'm taking it. Lassen made a mistake and gave me a dismissive look of disbelief. That's all it was took. I punched him, focusing my erratic strength, crippled as it was, into the strike. The sharp sound of his snout cracking told me that it was enough, and a drop of blood rolled from his nose, falling into the glass I held below it.
That hurt.
Lansing was growling through gritted teeth. Miska moved to his side in a flowing manner, tending to his freshly broken snout with a cascade of healing energies. I ignored him and set the glass on the device, then charged it with my aura. It hummed softly, and then the drop expanded, slowly at first, until the glass was about a third full, topping the runes around it, which began to glow in random patterns for but a few moments. Then, as I expected, the air above the glass lit with an azure flame, the blood evaporating, leaving only a set of runes glowing softly for a few moments before fading away. House of Fog. I said it with all the venom I could muster, as I grabbed the glass and turned to Justique, who had his hands raised in surrender and his head lowered.
House of Thunder. And since Mother and Father took us in on the Isle.
Justique's soft admission, full of pain, began to take the heat from my rage.
We're sorry. They told us about your...
And then it was back with the Fuhrer. Freakishness, my abnormality, I was only stopped by a light running over me from Miska. What are you... Sir Katheon, I detect no abnormalities. Are you well? I have various healing matas of various potencies. What is your ailment? Her simple concern and confusion doused any anger I might have had still. No, yeah, I mean, I am well, I am what is known as a hollow. An erratic with no higher form, no house or order. In essence, I'm an erratic cripple. The brothers were silent, but things began to make sense. That's why they always joined me for my morning exercises, for they were doing the same as I, training our aura. I'd always thought it was just to keep me company. Miska seemed to take a long moment to process this. I am unfamiliar. It's exceedingly rare. I was the first in millennia. It's why we left, to avoid the shame of this condition. But you can still activate auratic items and power them. That makes many of these designs make far more sense. Hugman seemed far more absorbed in the technical insights of this whole affair than the near brawl that had almost occurred, and began resorting the designs. I recommend we work on the items in the order I now have them here. And with that, we began to discuss how we would be spending the next few weeks, bringing Father's plans to life. As the sun's leading edge crested the horizon, I slowly drank my cup of cow, centering my thoughts and calming my body after the pre-dawn exercises that had become a part of daily life. I looked out across our modest progress and smiled. Mother and Father would be very proud. In the months after that harsh winter, with the help of our new partners in Miska and Ogman, along with their node, we have managed in months what might have taken the brother and I alone years. Multiple large fields, some with multiple symbiotic crops, all fully irrigated. The Celestians' node had proved its value every day. The series of walls and ditches along the edges of our land have shown their worth as well, holding fast during no less than half a dozen small raids and deterring who knows how many more. They'd even created a full road network, using the readily available clays to form raised, water-draining, and heatable roadways between each field, building, as well as along the walls and of course to and out of our front gate. We had managed to build a secure, multi-acre fortification with power and logistical infrastructure in half a year's time, unthinkable without the untiring aid and vast array skills the Celestians brought. It wasn't like the brothers and I had an easy time of it either. Oh no. While the Celestians were able to fortify and build and happily do the farming, they were not interested in going out to hunt or the like. That job fell to the brothers and I, as it should. The various woods had game both big and small, as well as an uncomfortable amount of hostile and dangerous entities. Thus, every hunt was a test, where failure was perhaps deadly. The brothers and I threw ourselves into the tasks, as it allowed us all to put to practice the things we trained each other in every morning and night. You see, after that night where the truth of the brothers' talent was made clear, instead of driving us apart for the secret, it gave us a true parallel and common ground to unite around. So each morning, I taught them what I knew, having been raised in the erratic traditions all my life, and from the extensive texts Mother and Father had brought with us. It came to no shock to me that there were a variety of texts related to both the brothers' specialties as well. On their half, the brothers trained me in every form of combat that they were versed in. They had apparently been earmarked as prodigies for their natural skill, an oft-missed sign of potential erratic talent, and had received basic training in a vast number of weapon styles and tactics. As we shared our knowledge with one another and incorporated the devices that Father had designed and Ogman manufactured, we rapidly saw tasks in areas that had been to be avoided or vastly prepared for, at first become just doable with a little less prep, and then eventually just another chore to be dealt with. These adventures allowed us to collect a large number of hides and a vast quantity of meat, to such an extent we were able to sell a fair bit of it on the side, making a bit of coin. With this, we were able to get more materials and goods for future projects. Things were good, and only looked to get better. As I saw the sky shift from dark of pre-dawn, I saw it, on the horizon to the north, a thick, sickly-looking plume of dark smoke. It was some distance away by the look of it, but whatever was making it, it was big. Ogman, who had just exited the workshop, followed my gaze before his eyes glowed and a whir came from deep within. That is a Celestian transport. I can faintly detect its signal. 25 to 25.5 miles away. Map indicates a large, old-growth forest, marked hostile. Hostile's a nice way to put it. Multiple large and enlightened tribes, orcs, gobs, even a few blesseds. Any way to tell if there are survivors? Ogman's eyes seemed to shimmer, so fast was he attempting to process. However, a small streak of light lit the plume for but an instant, and with it, I shouted for False and the brothers. There were survivors, and they were fighting. We were off in less than 5 minutes, moving full tilt towards the crash site. Ogman followed a short distance behind us, not able to keep pace with us, as we were using our auras to increase the speed we were able to go. We didn't even slow once we hit the forest's edge, with Lassen leading and False mirroring his path. Jastique flew in our wake, and we were like shadows in the early dawn, following the sounds of combat from deeper within this forest. When we arrived on the scene, the fighting had ebbed, with dozens of unenlightened strewn across the impact site. It was mostly quiet, with only the crackling of fires to be heard. The transport was in pieces, and looked as if it had been torn from the sky and into shred by something using very large claws. In the center of the site, where the cockpit of the craft had driven into the ground, was the only cluster of activity. Perhaps a dozen or so unenlightened were circling, trying to get into the cockpit. Only after one was forcibly ejected in a thundercrack of light and sound did we break our stealth and began to attack. It was a fairly quick fight, with half their number breaking away and fleeing, as the other half fell, trying to deal death to us. As Jastique flew above to get a look inside, he almost immediately had to dodge a large blast of energy that came from within the cockpit, followed by a panicked, staticky voice. "Shut in there! Shut in there! Dragon, damage! Please, assist. I am badly damaged. Please, respond." The brothers looked at each other before looking at me. Look said it all. My call. "Identify yourself." The reply was a long moment in coming. "Human, focal patterns. I am designated channel. I am unable to move or effect self-repair. Most systems are critically damaged. Please assist." Despite myself, I hopped from falls and up to the edge of the cockpit, looking over while trying to speak as normally as I could manage. Alright, don't shoot. Coming over the edge." Chanlos was barely an arm, a mass that may have been a torso, and a head. The hand of the arm was holding a pistol of some sort, but it was not raised. I had no idea how we would even begin to try to move him safely, when I heard the hooves of something moving quickly towards us. As I looked up, Ogman, on horseback, arrived, making a beeline for the cockpit and the three, now 4 of us. He must have known we would need him for any injured we would find. As soon as he stopped, he began in a rush. "We must leave now. Multiple dragon forms have been detected active and are heading this way." Dragons? Can it get any worse? "And that's what right now I and killed us all. You must leave. Recovery would take too long. You are in unnecessary danger." Chandler spoke with a certainty only cold logic could have provided. "Not happening until we get you out. Ogman, get up here." I was leaving no room for argument within my voice. However, Ogman was able to rapidly collect what there was to collect, both safely, and had a container with Chanlos and his parts secured to his steed in less than 2 minutes, and we were off, just as the trees above began to give way to oppressive scales, as a dozen or so smaller dragons, most of them maybe 5 years old perhaps, began to pick away at the sight. As we raced in the little remaining gloom of the forest, using speed as much as stealth to escape, we heard a familiar, deep roar. Phallus grabbed my ankles and pushed forward even faster. Despite knowing better, I tried to turn around, only to see Jastique flying closely behind us, and a look of recognition in his eyes as well. Luck was on our side, and as we broke from the edge of the forest and into the morning light, there was no pursuit evident in the sky or on the ground, and we made for home with no lessening of our pace. Best not to take our luck. Once we were home, Ogman and Miska had to work for 3 days and 3 nights with no break to repair Chandler's. Eventually, they were able to do so, but almost all of our extra materials had been used, including every last crisp we'd managed to gather over the year. As we sat around the table and discussed the current situation, one thing became clear. We were going to have to get some help to take on the threat that was this forest and its scaly residents. Sending a call to the hunters was the first plan. We'd even prepared the request when Chandlos walked in. His stride was shaky, and it was clear it would take him some time to get used to the new body constructed for him. He only said one thing, but it made a simple and inarguable point. The hunters are not the right option. This is a dragon problem. We should get dragons to solve it. Or more accurately, their knights. We all sat for a moment, the simple genius of it. And with that, the request we sent via Trebucom was not to the hunters, but to Dragon's Haven, addressed to Lord and Lady Genovan themselves. If there was anyone who could send the right kind of help, it would be the greatest Dragon Knights of the realms. It was less than a week after sending our dispatch, and in the early morning during our morning exercise, that Chandlos approached and interrupted us in the midst of our meditations. His tone was strangely panicked. So, Log 3 reports mass movement of unenlightened in our direction from the north. At current pace, we have less than 2 hours before they reach outer walls.
How many?
Lanson asked, already standing up and moving towards the house. We all moved at a concerted pace to the house to gather our gear and prepare. Estimate is between 50 to 60. Justique gave a low whistle.
We should be able to hold them at the walls, cut down the leaders, and they should flee in short order, just like the last few attacks.
We all nodded our agreement as we reached the house, prepared, and then made for the walls. Looking from the top of the walls, using Chandlos' vast array of sensors to see the oncoming force just as they crested the horizon. In short moments, all hope of this being in any way easy was shattered, as the outline of a sky ship was seen, flying very low behind the mast.
That is unfortunate.
Lassen sounded like we all felt. Standard model, infantry insertion and close support vehicle, average of 40 unenlightened capacity. Standard armament is a pair of multi-auto bolters, Chandlos recited. I, however, was far more worried about the 5 large shapes near the rear of the mast, using it to conceal those presences. Are those what I think? And I pointed to them, prompting Chandlos to focus and enhance on them, revealing that they were indeed Dracoforms. Smaller ones, perhaps the size of a large horse or maybe a bull.
By the dunes, 5 dragons.
Justique was in shock. Lanson's growl and the whirl of Chandlos' thinking made it clear we all knew what this indicated. We can't hold the walls. We aren't equipped for this kind of fight, I began. Pull back to the house. Chandlos, have the node locked down and seal the barn and workshop. I turned to walk away. Have Miss 3 keep an eye to the east and Og 3 to the west. The 1s, 2s, and 4s along with Miska and Ogman to the house, prepare for point defense. I descended from the wall quickly. 1s and 2s are on fortification and repair duties. 4 should be on reactive defense protocols. I was already making my way back to the house with everyone in close pursuit. Chandler softly buzzing, relaying my instructions. Now it is active and estimates full compliance with orders within 2 minutes. As we reached the cabin, we could see the ceiling shields, scintillating auras of energy that would prevent any egress or attack to affect the barn or workshop. Downside is we couldn't either, not for the entire day, until the batteries that powered the effect wore off. Entering the cabin, I immediately made for the mantle and grabbed Father's rifle, along with the last 3 rounds we had for it. Going to my room, with its north-facing window, I used the sill to level and steady the barrel, sighting just over the walls, and waited. Within moments, the shape of the skyship sped over the wall towards the house. Following closely in its wake were the 5 dragons. One directly in my sights, with the dawn's light making it a stark silhouette and thus an easy shot. It was like the worm's face had slammed into a wall, and only its head stopped, with its forward momentum taking the rest of its body and flipping it as it continued forward, pivoting at the point of impact, with the dragon skull slowly rotating while exploding in a cloud of gore. As its fellows turned as one to circle back over the walls in defensive response, roaring their displeasure, I tried to slam another round into the rifle. That's when the skyship made its first pass, unleashing a storm of bolts as it flew over the cabin. The incoming bolts shattered glass, punctured walls, before fading away into an ethereal mist. "Ah, great," I gasped. "Conjured ammunition!" I yelled to the rest of them, warning them that the skyship would not be running out of ammo. At all. As I dove back, Miss 2 entered my room, and with a sweep of her arm, she mended all the walls and glass using her abilities. As I got up to reassess the situation, a cry from the main room downstairs shifted my focus.
"Justik! Mister! Get over here!"
I rushed to the railing overlooking the room, and I saw Miska leaning over Justik, with Lesson looking down at him before up at me.
"He yelled at us from the first salvo."
Justik was in a pool of his own blood. His wings were shredded, blood seeping from the tears. Miska was tending to him with a practiced haste, casting spells of healing and mending. A shadow passed over them, and I was already jumping over the railing, sheath's edge in my hands, when the orc crashed through the window, keen on putting a knife in Lanson's turnback. Landing and rebounding from the floor in between them, the orc only noticed me a moment before sheath's edge pierced his gut, the force of my leaping attack halting his own and carrying the 2 of us back towards the window. Upon reaching its opening, I caught the sill with my feet. The orc slid off my blade and continued to fly back out the window as I pushed myself backwards, away from the sill. Just as Chandler stepped into the opening and reached out the window with his weapon, a Chris gun of some sort. With a mechanical speed, he swept from left to right, firing rapidly. From the wet, explosive sounds, it would seem that he hit his mark far more than he did not. This display of rapid and brutal violence only elicited the invaders to begin crashing in from all sides and windows. Upon hearing the sounds of combat reverberating throughout the cabin, Lanson let loose with a deep growl, and I felt him call forth his power. In an instant, every bit of water in the cabin was converted into a thick fog, one that filled the entirety of our cabin. In the next minutes, what had been an overwhelming assault became a death trap for our attackers, as neither Lassen, with his preternatural senses, or the Celestians with their multitude of sensors, nor myself with my erratic sight, were really hampered by the mist. Our attackers did not share this trait, and were quickly dispatched or routed, as Ogman shouted over the clamor. "Octay and his sister Mystery report 2 more matching forces approaching at speed from each of their directions. Their array deploying from within the walls." As another series of boats struck the house and were mended in quick order, the dragons made their first pass. It then was taking all the Celestians' efforts to keep up with the damage. "Octay, Master Lawson's fog has extended to all walls and is approximately 30 foot deep. Attacking ground troops are now in disarray," Miska relayed. "I was unaware you were able to affect such a wide area, Lassen." Lassen had a focused yet grim face.
"Can't. Selling the cabin is taking all I have."
"Then who?" I started to ask when a series of loud roars and crashes were heard raining down from all about the cabin. It lasted all of a minute, tops, and was followed by utter silence. The mist lit up and reflecting what had to be a dozen or so small fires from around the cabin. Then we heard someone walk up to the front door, heavily. What followed was completely unexpected, and I nearly jumped out of my skin. With all this power, the reason why the knights are not the poster boys of the realm is due to a general quirk of dragonkind within the realms. While massively powerful, both individually as in an aggregate, as well as having overwhelming numbers, the dragons and their knights are not a unified group, as each of the main variants of dragon rarely have a consensus within their own faction, let alone across greater dragon kind. This results in a majority of the actions of both dragons and their knights being focused on other knights and their dragons. Thus, the greater realms are very rarely aware of the near constant conflict, or more accurately, they're unaware of its scale. So, for the most part, they are too busy dealing with draconic affairs to get up to too much that catches the public attention in any negative way. However, on Gemimar there is one place that a person could go and see nearly any variant of knight, and perhaps even dragon. Dragon's Haven. Ruled and protected by its founders, Lord and Lady Genovan, and founded in the years before the rise of the V's. Dragon's Haven serves as neutral ground for the meetings of draconic factions, as well as a central hub for calls of aid or assistance in matters draconic. Indeed, many matters of draconic politics, schemes, their counters, are birthed, occur, and die here, as well as it being a place where knights can learn, teach, and train, both about their own powers and that of others. It also serves as the surest way to find deeds to be done, as otherwise the knight will just wander the realms looking to be at the right place at the right time. There are still a large number of knights that stick to this oldest and most traditional of methods, but even they will occasionally visit the Haven, if only to report some oddity, or get their gear repaired or acquire new gear to replace broken items. Thus, Dragon's Haven is likely to remain a place of massive, if underappreciated power and influence across the realms, so long as the Dragon Knights themselves retain power and influence. And with this brief look of the Knights and Heralds of Dragonkind at its end, and before we get back to our tale, by the 9 and 4, be well, take care of yourselves, and each other. I look forward to your return to the library in future. Now, let's get back to the story. There was a knock, followed by a greeting. Hello? Is this the house of Katheon and his brothers? I am from Dragon's Haven. We shuffled to our feet as Og 4 opened the door with a weapon drawn, just in case of treachery. Stepping through the door, and wearing a heavy set of armor with only his arms bare, what could only be a Dragon Knight dipped his head in greeting. Well met, good sirs. I see I have arrived too late. On behalf of Lord and Lady Genovan, I beg your forgiveness at the slowness of my arrival. This attack should not have been allowed to occur. I am Knight Lord Mikkel, and I'm here to end this threat. His intensity seemed to slowly fade as he looked about the cabin. Are there any injured? I see you enjoy the partnership of a node. Is there anything that they require? I am Katheon, and we are tending to ours now, but Chenelos can fill you in on any logistical needs we may have. Your arrival, however, was timely. I was going to continue, when 3 large explosions sounded from around the farm, the heat of which burned away all the fog and mist, even Lassens, who then slumped into a chair, utterly exhausted. As Miska spun on her waist and began casting minor healing spells on each of us, restoring our hearing from the ringing that was now filling them, we could see that there was none of our attackers left. Their ships crashed and destroyed, and the corpses of the 15 dragons strewn about. As we gawked at the carnage, the knight spoke. Forgive my bluntness, Sir Katheon, but they will attack within a week. So I am going to be leaving in the morning to dispatch them. If you and your brothers intend to be part of it, as you say in your request, be ready 3 hours before dawn. After seeing how you fight, I welcome you on this hunt. He seems so sure of himself. Who's the one who shot the dragon on the north end? All pointed to me, as I recovered Father's rifle from where it had landed on the landing, and placed it, along with the last 2 rounds we had, back on the mantle. It was a clean surprise shot, nothing special. I turned to look to everybody. We will be ready, but how many more shall we expect to join us from your order? The man named Mikkel looked at me with a grin. None? For I'm more than qualified to handle this. See you before dawn. I'm going to go patrol the local area while you recover and repair. And with that, he turned and walked out, leaving us to tend our own matters. The next morning we made for that forest again, Mikkel in the lead. This morning there was a deep fog covering everything in a nice, soft, cool mist. It was Mikkel, the brothers, and myself, and the mist slowed none of us down as we entered the forest, quietly moving towards the crash site, as we figured we could use that as a defensible place to provoke a response from the local residents. It was eerily quiet, and we couldn't hear any of the unlighted camps, nor could we see the firelight of such in the fogs. Thus, the brothers and I were scanning the fogs carefully, looking for any sign of an attack or a trap. Mikkel just strode forward to our destination. Entering the clearing of the crash site, we found the mist to be much thinner here, as there were small fires placed around randomly that seemed to burn off enough mist to allow a few hundred feet of vision in any direction. It was as we reached the center of the site that at least a score, if not many more, smaller dragons surged from the canopy all around us, where they must have been hiding and waiting for us to approach. Mikkel merely unleashed a roar that shook the ground and grew to nearly 12 foot tall, sprouting massive wings and unleashing a gout of white fire into the oncoming dragons, leaving only ash floating in its wake. As I scanned around, looking for targets, I saw a large pile of wreckage, piled maybe 50 feet away, shift slightly as Mikkel turned his back to it, as he unleashed streams of fire and cut down anything that came even remotely close. I lifted my crisp pistol and rapidly fired at the pile, and the brothers, without hesitation, followed suit. As our shots approached the pile, it fell away with a deep, familiar roar, cut short only as the fusillade of fire from the brothers and I struck this ambushing dragon from the side. As the dragon roared its anger at the sudden attack and turned to silence the source, its eyes froze, jaw parted slightly, before its head and about 2 feet of its neck just slid down and fell to the ground, cleanly cut off by Mikkel with his massive blade. By that point, any of the other dragons that might have been attacking were now gone, and the fogs were slowly receding as dawn fully broke through the darkness of the forest canopy. Looking around, we could see that there were hundreds of fallen unenlightened, and scores of dragons. We were struck dumb by the scale of this carnage this man created once more. One night, just one, took on a whole family of worms and their unenlightened followers, and made a morning's work of their destruction. Thank the Nine Wings, he's on our side. It's been a much milder winter so far this year. The fact that we now had an array of various improvements about the farm made it an even easier season. The heated roads, the drainage for the melted snow, among many other such improvements had made it possible to stay productive in these snowy months. The vast amount of material and resources we have obtained after the slaying of the dragon Rotwood and his brewing storm of scales, along with their unenlightened minions, had gone to good use, and none less than the prize to roll out of that murderous worm's mouth, an honeycrisp. Much to the brothers and I even think Mikkel's shock, I chose not to sell it, but to allow the Celestians to use it, along with the wreckage of the transport and the vast amounts of smaller crisps we had obtained, to construct and install a large number of various improvements to our lands. The Ani was turned into an advanced central control center and power regulator, allowing the Celestians to manage the various remote drones that have been built to aid in our maintaining and the protection of our lands. Even as the fields slept beneath the snow, we were still able to use these resources to continue to produce goods to trade in spring. The windmills that we had constructed were dotted about every 50 yards, fed collected power directly into the vast systems that we had built, keeping the roads clear, the buildings warm. Even so, there was far more time for training and learning how to use the new personal equipment we had now been able to construct, such as the devices Augmen was teaching me to use, a set of fueled, controllable, explosive delivery rods. You see, Katheon, when you throw the joystick, the momentum of the throw will cause the liquid metal in this spark to pull back, pulling the sparker back, priming the fuel pressure, and then igniting it. The thrust from this will then cause this ring to slide back. As he slid the ring in question towards the rear of the rod, causing two sets of fins to rise, one in the front and one in the rear of the rod. I gasped as I could now feel the fins and the rod via the device I now wore on my left arm, and I could see as if I was looking from the front of it. I see the sense link is functional. Would you please try to manipulate the... He made a very pleased sound as it made the fins lean and shift. Excellent. Now, as I have described, once the joystick strikes, you can ignite the warhead to cause the main body to blow off and away, while the warhead will detonate a few moments later. After that, you may use the control rig to detect and recover the main body. Please do this. He lifted a pouch. This sack contains a variety of warheads and enough fuel to rearm them 8 times each. There are specialist warheads in there as well. The pride in his digital voice spoke to those warheads being special indeed. Before he could continue, we heard the sounds of a passing skyship, a fast, sleek vessel, scout of some kind. It caught our attention, and I waved to the enlightened on board. And much to my shock, less than a minute later they sharply banked, turning back into our direction, low, fast, an attack posture. Augmen, with the reactions that only a machine can have, managed to raise an energy shield just as the first volley made its way to us. Unfortunately, a few made it in before he could raise a shield, and I was driven to the ground as a bolt caught me in my shoulder. Katheon, we are under attack. I cannot tend to you and maintain this shield.
The band's attending with me. Give me one of the joysticks.
Fortunately, my throwing arm was still working, and as the skyship flew over, still strafing into the shield, I felt Augmen place one in my outstretched hands. I rolled over to my knees, catching sight of them as they began to bank for their next run. Focusing past the fire in my shoulder, I slung the joystick, and then let myself fall to the ground, using my control rig glove to guide it as it launched forward. Augmen, without a moment's hesitation, shifted and placed his shield to cover me. I readied to guide the attack home, but I didn't need to, as I could see the joystick was flying true. My moment of satisfaction was soon doused, however, when it smashed into the skyship's shield, snapping into place to defend it, and did nothing but bounce off. The skyship pilot, to their credit, changed course to double back, holding this into a ranged fight. As my attack fell away uselessly, I felt my hand again fill with another joystick. Katheon, you must strike. We cannot keep this engagement up like this. I looked and saw the tip of this one was a dark black crystal. A wicked smile went across my face as I stood again and launched the joystick high, ducked quickly behind the shield to control the attack as it cut its fiery path towards the skyship. The pilot must have assumed his shields would again save him, but as I guided the joystick towards the base of the main rotating blade holding the craft aloft, The void tip on its warhead made a mockery of those shields. Setting it off as Augment had described, the resultant detonation set up something within it, and the middle of the skyship just disappeared in a loud flash, and the rest fell to the ground in a thundering crash.
Why in the hell did they attack us?
Unclear. They were professionals, however. That vessel had markings. Yeah, I saw. Look like cloudwalkers? But why would they attack us? Unclear, but that was only a scout vessel, and they may have had time to signal for backup. On that note, we quickly made our way to both recover the spent tubes and make it back to the house as quickly as possible. As we neared the outer gate and wall, Augment told me that we had a guest. Chanlos was stalling for time, allowing us to come up from behind on this suspiciously timed visitor. Standing on the porch comfortably, arrayed in a fine suit of dragon scale armor, was a heavily built Man'ari warrior. The brothers came from around the back of the house and placed him in a crossfire between the three of us. We slowed for a stop to about 30 feet behind him. Looking him over, I addressed him, barely holding the annoyance from my voice. I just had to rip a scout ship from the skies, I began. A slight shift in his stance as he took my words in. I would very much like to know what business you have with us, and why now of all times, if you'll forgive the suspicion. He looked around slowly, and then turned to face me. A wide, wry smile was spreading across his face. Most impressive, but that's only one of 3 scout ships your foe has brought to this battle. The tone he used impressed upon me this was more than it appeared. One of 3. Who are you, sir, and how do you come to bring us this information? To protect a mutual acquaintance, who would face censure most severe if he were to be caught being involved in this. I apologize, but I cannot answer your query fully. However, I can tell you the reason those ships and the 3 carriers they are supporting are on their way here now. He waited, and I nodded for him to continue. Our mutual acquaintance caught wind of this and let it slip during a night of camaraderie. I am here to do what he cannot. And if you just took out one of the scouts, the main thrust cannot be more than a day away. More likely, they'll be here in less than 12 hours. The air was still with the impact of what he had just said, as it sunk in. Then he continued. Rotwood, the dragon you so rightly slayed in vengeance, had a knight. And a knight has survived the death of his worm. Such a very rare thing. He seemed more impressed by that fact than anything else he was relaying. That knight may not bear a scale anymore, and he has apparently decided you, your brothers, and this farm are to blame for what has happened, and it is you that will pay. He has used the great wealth that he has to contract Cloudwalkers. From what I know, he has paid them to send a Griffin and 2 Falcon carriers that are attached to attack and drop ships, along with 3 Pigeon-class scouts, along with somewhere between 500 to 700 troops to attack, kill, and loot everything here.
Clawwalkers. Damn it.
It was all that Lasson could manage. To his credit, it was more than I could in that moment. After going inside and gathering around the table and the images Chanlos was now projecting upon it of the farm and the area around it, our mysterious guest was showing us vectors of attack, potential landing points in the snow-covered fields that surrounded the main house and buildings. They have 6 assault and 4 transport and close supports on those carriers. Each transport's good for 50 to 100 troops, maybe more. The Falcons lack any bombardment range firepower, but each boasts a heavy number of launchers on either side for bolts. However, the Griffon is equipped with a force maker. Apparently, my reaction was not satisfactory to him, as you appear to be unaware. It launches a large ballista bolt in a high arc, with a tremendous amount of spin. As it begins its downward falling arc, dozens of arrow-shaped projectiles will fly off of it. The magics that were on those little pieces of wood will be gone, and they return to their roughly 20-foot size. They can fire 1 of these rounds a minute, and standard kit is 20 rounds of ammo. Thinking about the devastation such a weapon could cause, that caught our attention, almost as quickly as I dismissed it. They won't use it if they don't have any other choice. Everyone looked at me. This is about revenge. This knight wants us dead on his sword. I looked at our guest. That kind of landing force and weaponry could just steamroll us, no questions asked. But that troop count? That can only be justified by a capture objective. A low whistle from our guest and a broad smile lit up his face and his response. Very well reasoned, young man, and I agree. Landing and capture seems the most reasonable explanation for the order of battle we see laid before us. I'm glad we agree. Now, if you'd be so kind to follow Chanlos and make an inspection of the fields. See if you guys can come up with some way to prepare for these inevitable landings. We don't have any method to prevent them. We can only try to slow the assault, maybe thin them out. He nodded and looked at Chanlos, who looked at me impassively, his way of conveying his confusion to my words. As the drones we built were only for observation, conveyance, and maintenance, we can't expect too much out of them. However, if we could, I would like to use them to scare our attackers into fearing being assaulted from 2 sides. It might give us some more breathing room. With that, Chanlos led him out to make the inspection. Moving a little smoother, I figured he got the gist of my idea. As soon as they were out to make their inspection, I looked to Miska. Have M3 get eyes in the air. I turned to Ogman then. Do me a favor. Reactivate the vision grid, please. The table again lit, with images of the farm, with pulsing glyphs for our guest and Chanlos, as well as one showing Miss 3 stepping out from the workshop, and her mechanical falcon-shaped drone taking to the air. A few minutes into their inspection, and a red spot appeared at the map on Chanlos' location, strange glyphs around it, trying to determine who had just shown up. And in a flash, the glyph of our guest flashed and went dull. In a panic, I poked Chanlos on the map, opening communications to him. Report! Chanlos spoke in an even tone. Unknown has teleported in and slain our guest. While our guest appeared to be in the process of attempting to use some sort of device on me. One moment, I'm analyzing. The sounds of his system looking over the item were the only noise for a long moment. Confirmed. It is a Celestigam. It appears he meant to force a shutdown. That would have taken at least 24 hours to recover from. 48 most likely. The sound of the device being crushed could be heard. Unknown would like to speak to you. He has asked for you by name. Patch him through and stay still, just in case. A moment later, and the image of our latest guest came through. Taller than Chanlos or the brothers, and wearing what appeared to be robes of a stiff gray material of some sort. He leaned on the massive axe that he carried with him, its single blade marred by the frozen blood of our previous guest, and held a massive tower shield in his other arm. This could only be a praetor, and a big one at that. He spoke smoothly. "Greetings, and my apologies for not being able to make it here sooner." He looked around meaningfully, "as I really don't want to suffer your mistrust and worry. And with the oncoming horse that's on its way here, I'll tell you what a little worm told me. 2 on the mantle, Katheon." And with that, all, except me, turned and looked at the mantle, where the 2 rounds from my father's rifle still sat beneath it. I was left smiling at the clever nature of it. "Bring him back to the house. He's a friendly. And make sure to check that body. I am guessing that is our knight." The sounds of the dragon's scale armor being removed without concern for the body within revealed how quickly such armor can be shed if safety is not a factor. Chandler spoke as he looked at it and showed the body of our guest in the sick burned cavity in the front of his chest, about the size of a dragon's scale. "Confirmed, this was a dragon knight." The hands of our latest guest could be seen pulling a scroll from the pouch on his torso and reading it, a long frown spreading across his blue and violet patterned face. "It's Cloudwalker's contract. Order of battles to assault and kill anyone that hasn't been restrained by this arse by the time of the attack. If they can't find him, they are to kill everyone." Well, that makes things more complicated, as I was hoping the death of their employer would end their contract. This one had thought ahead to the notion that he might fall, as had his worm. And there was a sliver of hope. "Get back here. We need to make ready. I have no intention of letting them make good on that contract. But I have an idea. Be sure to bring his body in gear." I woke up to find myself confused, and on a bed I had never known. I looked around the room, trying to get my bearings and clear the fog that was heavy in my mind. It felt like I'd been run over by stampeding cattle, my body and mind sore in a way I've never felt before in my life. Taking in the room I was in as I got out of bed, it was a simple affair. Spacious, mostly empty, just containing the bed I awoke on and a wardrobe, along with a full-size mirror next to it. The wardrobe had a folded piece of paper resting on the small knobs that served as handles, upon which my name was emblazoned. Looking at myself in the mirror, I could see I was wearing some sort of bed clothing, a loose shirt with long sleeves and matching pants, which were of a plain white material I was unfamiliar with, but it was smooth and comfortable. I walked over and took the paper, opening it and reading the message within.
"Howdy, stranger. Of all the places for us to again cross paths, the death of the Dragwa Undercity was admittedly not one I had ever considered. And finding you naked and unconscious in such a state was certainly an unexpected event. Fear not, you are safe. And you are currently the guest of a kind and proper host, and I'd ask that you keep that in mind, for my sake. Please find within this wardrobe that gear and equipment of yours that I could locate and gather. Once you have gotten your things and are ready to, please introduce yourself to your host. He will be able to arrange for your exit from this place. May our crabs cross again in better days. The Merchant."
My mind took a long, groggy moment before the face of this author came to mind. He was a tall man, hunched over by the weight of his voluminous robes, from which he seemed to be able to draw and store all manners of items and goods. We had dealt with him the last time just before winter last, and he had driven hard but very fair bargains, and was able to buy the bulk of the draconic materials we had gathered from the Rotwood incident, and provided not only money, but also hard-to-find and rare materials for the farm's upkeep and maintenance. But what was an old man like that doing in the Undercity? How did he manage to survive down here, and for that matter, how did I manage? As I pondered this, I opened the doors to the wardrobe. Within, I smiled as I saw my packs, my blade, sheath's edge, along with some packages wrapped in a stiff, thick paper. Wrapped around my sword was another note, and I took both the sword and the note. Opening the missive, I couldn't read the lettering and was confused for a moment, before the lettering glowed with an azure light and faded, and I felt the thrust of the meaning of the note course through me. Automatically, I gripped my sword and felt my aura flow into the weapon as had done so many times, turning the deep purple felt of the lining of the sheath, as well as the silver braiding on the edges, into a melting form before solidifying into a razor-sharp edge, hence the blade's name, Sheath's Edge. But then I felt something different. My aura, being guided by the knowledge within the note, found and began working a mechanism within the top of the sheath I had never known existed. Then, the true blade slid free, the sheath returning to its normal purple and silver. I took a look, and for a moment my eyes could not tell quite what they were looking at. And then it became clear. There were two blades, and they were kept from touching by a thick, clear crystal. One was of a midnight hue, blue, and the other was like a gray and azure tint. Pulling it fully free from the sheath, I felt how much more nimble and quick this blade was, and realized I had much more to learn with this family heirloom. Resheathing and setting the blade to the side, I reached out for my bags and gear harness when I noticed it on my left wrist and forearm. It looked like a leather bracer, but it felt much heavier. It was only adorned with the sun and tooth sigil of my family's house. And, as if by thinking about it or by instinct, my aura flew into it, and felt as a fully formed suit of armor, made of what looked like thin, flexible gray sheets, came into being around me. A half dome behind my head, and upon my shoulders were devices that seemed to follow my line of sight. And I began to notice that I was aware of materials of what I was looking at, sizes and dimensions. Looking back into the wardrobe, I began to wonder how best to adjust my bags and harnesses to accommodate this armor, and then gasped as a pair of mechanical arms extended from over my shoulders and from under my arms around my back and stretched out to begin doing that very thing. After grabbing the bags and resizing straps, and then my sword, placing it at my side, the arms began to look over a pile of scrap that had been loosely contained within a package of paper. I realized it was the remains of the control sleeve Ogman had made, based off of Father's designs. In only moments, the arms had integrated all the salvageable pieces of the device into the greater armor I was wearing. I pulled out a Javseek and slid the weight ring back. I smiled as the mental image of the Javseek's forward path bloomed into life into my mind's eye, just as it had been designed to. This armor was a wonder, and looking in the mirror I realized it was fitted to me perfectly. Wherever this came from, it was a work of erratic artifice and a relic of a much older age. I realized then that a different pistol was in the holster at my side, not the simple and basic one I had been using. Sticking out of the inside of the holster, just behind the gun, was another note. It was written in the same handwriting as the one on the wardrobe.
Happy birthday, Katheon. As I couldn't find your sidearm along the rubble I found you in, I have chosen to replace it with this little trinket. A hybrid crisp ballistic pistol. You'll find 3 additional magazines in your side pouches, and instructions and tools to make more rounds within your camp kit. The charge packs are standard type 1x2s, so your current supply will work with it. Enjoy!
I slid the note into my belt with a smile, and looked at the last package in the wardrobe. I lifted it and just slid its heavy mass into my bag, smiling. I did not know what it was exactly, but I did know what it would gain me. That was, if I could manage to make it back out of the Undercity. My thoughts were snapped back to the current scenario as I felt my gut resound with a loud chorus of rumbles, and it expressed its displeasure at my not eating. I was famished, and I looked to the door of the room, and I made my way to go out and meet my host. I heard a soft pop as the now empty wardrobe just fell away from reality like a shadow before a candle. As I slid the door open and I stepped out into the hallway, I could hear a voice from down the hall, and while I could not make out the words, the tone was most definitely clear. Exasperation. I chose to walk a bit more noisily than I would have normally. Best to allow my host to know of my advent, and be able to set aside anything he wouldn't want a guest asking impertinent questions about. As I exited the hall and entered a vast space, I saw the speaker, still exasperated, but I now saw the other end of the conversation, and I couldn't quite keep a smile off of my face. The man, if you would call him that, was wearing robes that hid the bulk of his form, except for his hands and above his neck. I say man, for his tone and style of dress was masculine, but being fleshless and naught but bones, I really couldn't be sure. He was fiddling with some device that had sparks and acrid smoke trailing out from some malfunction or another. Even lacking the flesh of a face, between the pale flicker of his yellow eyes and the set of his jaw, his annoyance at the misbehaving device in front of him was as clear as a dragon's breath in the night sky. He looked up and set those flaming eyes upon me, and I felt a warmth flow across me. He smiled and greeted me, clearing the table with a wide sweep of his arm, each item sliding to the edge of the table in an orderly and organized manner.
Good, good! You're finally awake. You've been out for 2 days solid.
He pointed to a table beside me with a dome-covered tray.
There's some breakfast for you. Please, please, bring it over here and enjoy as you explain to me how you came to be found naked and alone so deep into the Undercity.
I did as he instructed and sat across from him.
My name is Jackson, and I am a lich, by the way, if you're trying to figure that part out.
His face was warm and welcoming, for being fleshless, and I began my tale as I dug into the savory meal I found under the dome. It had been hours, and I had eaten and drank deeply while sharing the manner of how I had come to the home city with my new host Jackson, answering his queries as he raised them.
So you and your brothers took out 3 scout ships, and then their response was to completely surround you with ground forces, and you yet somehow made their commander come to discuss terms. Would you explain how that even happens?
Jackson's amusement was all I needed to explain. Well, the first one I took out with a Javseek. His curious look prompted me to pull one from my pack and let him take a look at it as I continued. And when they attacked the farm, the brothers actually took the other 2 scout ships out. After that, it was a simple fact to tell him that he was violating council law with the contract.
Was he?
Jackson asked as he was examining the Javseek, playing with the fins and mechanisms. Well, yes, in fact. Their contractor was a dragon knight of a dragon that had been declared threat and antagonist to the civilized people. Cloudwalkers can't take contracts for them.
Good point. But how did you convince him not to just roll you over? He was already there, had the forces, and if the contracts managed to be signed, despite the protections in place to prevent such things, he could claim plausible deniability. Remember how I said it took us almost a week to gather all the spoils from taking out that dragon rotwood? Even with the help of a Celestian node? Yeah. You said there had been vast stocks of various weapons, simple Christ rifles, a raiding force for Domnitra. A full attack? Thousands of them. Tens of thousands, actually. Recall how I said they all went to good use? Yeah. Wait, those windmills! This Jackson was a quick one. Yep. We built multiple turrets into each. The original idea was to have ready pest control, with point defense being a secondary concern. But with an armament force like that, I just pointed out to their commander that they might be low damage, but shot 10,000 bee stings will still kill you. And I'd make sure none of them made it out. That did speed along our discussions. So where was your lie? Excuse me? Where was your lie? Or the bluff, if you would prefer. You would have not gone to discussing terms after downing 3 of their craft, if you could have ended the attack with a flip of a switch. So, where was the lie? Well, all the guns were powered and installed. We just hadn't been able to finish out all the work to make it able to control and aim them. I smiled widely. Besides, our terms were simple. We asked for their withdrawal, a skyship transport, and a guarantee that we would never have this happen again. His chuckle was a thing of merriment and joy. Oh, and I assume you had to come to the Isle to get the skyship fresh off the building line. Yes. And while we were so close to the home city, the brothers wanted to take me to go down to the home city itself, as they had just grown old enough to make the journey to the Undercity for their trial. And you chose to join them? Aren't you a bit young for that? My apologies, young man. I turned 13 in... I looked over at a clock and calendar on the wall behind him. Today, in fact. Besides, by oath and honor, we were allowed to make the trip together. We are brothers. That brought a wry smile across his face. So, how deep did you guys get before things went wrong? He handed back to Jeff, so he can then focused his full attention upon me. His hands, however, were moving and working on something as we spoke, with bits and parts floating from various boxes and shelves around us in this grand workshop. Level 9 is where we got separated. It had taken us 3 days to get down that far. We made it to level 6 and decided to make the choice to go as far as we could. But we also made the decision that if we got separated, we were to make for the surface and wait for each other. Good plan. So what happened? I went over it in my mind before answering. I'm not entirely sure. The brothers were checking out a room to camp in on level 9. I was guarding the door in the hallway. We had had a close call, or 4 or 5, with various beasts coming in from the halls, so we had started leaving one of us at the door at all times. Just a lot of alarms, sirens, and an explosion. The brothers came out before the explosion with it hot on their heels. They were firing at something. I don't know what it was. The explosion that they were trying to escape tore out of the room and separated us by the force of its blast. By the time I got up to my feet and had tried to have my gun in my hand, it was melted away to the handle. The walls just closed. They were on the other side. I couldn't even hear them.
I tried to find the way up. I tried to backtrack. But whatever... There were more explosions, and I kept having to duck into various rooms to avoid a confrontation that I probably couldn't take. More than once I was forced to actually dive down a set of stairs. I always seem to find the downstairs. It can be that way down here. And tell me, where did you find that? He pointed a long, bony finger at my armor. I haven't seen something like that in a very long time. A work of art. Where did you find it? 13th level. There was a room I took shelter in, a big room. Mostly dark, but massive. Benches, boxes. Not quite sure what it was. I didn't want to get too far from the door lest it disappear on me. The armor, it was on a pedestal under a sheet near the entrance. I pulled the sheet off so I could roll it up to have something to lay on. My bedroll was damaged, let's say. Slimes. Why are there slimes in the undercity? But I digress. I had taken the sheet off to throw on the ground, and I saw the armor, and I didn't even really think about it. I reached out and touched it because... And then I gestured to the symbol on the shoulder. This is my family's sigil. And, well, the second I made contact, it attached itself to me, I guess? I was still in awe of it, and despite my worry, it felt right, as I wore it. It was a part of my body I had forgotten to exist. I continued. I haven't a clue on how something with my family seal found its way down here. Interesting. Well, cherish it, my good man. It is a beautiful work of art. So, what happened that you didn't make good on your escape? The 13th floor is a very dangerous place. Well, something began to chase me. I tried 3 or 4 times to leave that room, and every time I found someone or something was trying to chase me and trap me. I could never lay my eyes on them, but the signs and evidence were clear. That went on for a day or two. It's kind of hard to tell down here. Then, I guess he figured out where I was hauled up in, or whatever it was. Because the door of the room I was in was being attacked. I got woke up to it. I went to escape out of a side room door. Like I said, I had lost my pistol in the explosion, and as I made to escape out, I saw the handle of a gun sticking out of a box on the way out, so I grabbed it. From that point, it's kind of a blur of me being chased by shadows and explosions and moving walls, and knowing if I got caught, that was it. I've never been scared like that in my life. Even seeing Rotwood face me down to... I've never felt that. I don't know how I made it down the next 2 floors, but I do remember going down and at the bottom of the stairs seeing a sign with the markings 15. And I remembered that I had nowhere else to run. There's nowhere else past 15. And that is when you finally decided to fight back. If you'll call it that, yeah. I didn't even get my first shot off. I turned around and looked like a backhand from some shadowy mass. I barely caught the blow with the gun's heavy barrel. I mean, it saved my life, but I went flying. I again tried to take a shot at him, and, well, that amongst... Oh, it was so loud and bright. I can't really remember much else beyond that. For his part, he seemed to take my story in stride. And, having survived, what do you intend to do now, young Katheon? Well, the note left for me said you could get me back to the surface. And I have my proof of making it down here, or, well, at least to level 13. I reached behind me and pulled out and unwrapped the gun. It was a big, heavy, and ugly thing. Jackson somehow sucked in what sounded like a vast amount of air as the room itself seemed to be in shock. That is what you intend to use as your proof? I nodded in response. I think I can do you one better, if you might consider a trade. Well, why? You see, Katheon, that weapon is from an age that should be forgotten, and it should be left in the past where it came from. It's a wonder you fired it and lived. That would explain why you've been out for days. It drained you and nearly killed you to power itself for that shot. You must be a mighty one indeed. I nearly dropped it at that statement, suddenly afraid that it would eat me alive. As it was, I gingerly slid it towards him on the paper. He laughed with a wide smile. How does the skull smile wider? Have no fear, it will be safe here. And as a bonus, just by returning the way you are about to, your success will be clear to all. You will have been known to made it to the bottom of the Undercity. He grinned at my confusion. What? Do you not think the twin gods, Blade and Chain, are not aware that I am down here? We have tea every Wednesday. Anyway, I would give you this in exchange. A weapon for a weapon, and one I think you would find much more fitting for you. He then extended what appeared to be a short spear to me, having just finished making it. What was this lich? It had a 4-foot handle and a 2-foot blade that had 4 edges, but it looked like someone had taken the blade and twisted it, making it have the appearance of a drill. Along the handle there were about 3 dozen raised semi-cylinders spiraling along the length of the handle. Holding it, shifting it around for the weight, I could feel that he had crafted this specifically for me, unerratic. And as I played with it a little bit and pushed my energy into it, that tipped drill-like blade begun to spin, faster as I put more energy into it. Soon, crackling arcs of power sparked from it as it went, eventually forming into a nimbus of crackling energy as I swung it around. A few swings and moves followed, and then I set it back down beside me, pleased as the blade stopped spinning as soon as I had stopped feeding it power. Before letting it go and remembering the lesson I had just learned with my sword sheath's edge, I pushed and felt with my power, and found the spear had another trick. One that made me smile widely. A smile that was matched by my host. You are a very quick study. Now, you said your brothers would only wait a week or so, and that time must nearly be at an end. So, allow me to show you the lift, and you can just leave that there. He gestured to where I had let the gun lay as I tried out the spear and my sword with concert with each other. I could tell I had at last found a set of weapons that called to me, and was already thinking of how to best train and master this new way of combat. The brothers were in for a surprise. So, Mr. Jackson, I assume I'm not supposed to tell anyone about you? What about my brothers? Again, you are quick. However, only those that have ever made it here and know what is here would even believe you. Your brothers will not, for every Dragois is raised knowing there is naught but monsters and death here. or undeath as it may be, then I shall keep it to myself. But I have to ask, why do you stay here? Are you cursed to stay here or something like that? The lights that were his eyes nearly blinked out at that. Cursed. It's not a bad way of putting it, but no. I stay because this is my home. He opened the door to the lift and gestured for me to enter. This will take you to the throne room. Hope you're ready to meet some gods. With a mischievous grin, he closed the door behind me and sent the lift up. As I watched the young man leave as the lift took him back up to the surface, I could hear Lefty slide out from where he had remained hidden while I and the young man Katheon spoke.
Well, would you look at that?
He gestured to the gun sitting on the table.
How many of those did you say were made?
I did not want to respond, but he already knew the answer. 10. The original pair and the 4 sets of copies. And that is one of the originals.
I know of 8 that are scattered amongst museums and private collections. None of them are anywhere near functional. And all the days for it to be found and brought to you, the day I come to seek one. There are forces at work, it would appear. Even you would need to agree to that.
Lefty seemed displeased at this stroke of fortune, as was I. Yes, and I can only hope that child's part in this is over. For no one should have to be involved with such forces at such a young age. I remembered an elven child with the same look in his eyes, so many years ago. And what fate came to him? It's a wonder he isn't dead.
I'd wager that takes him far afield from this.
He picked up the gun, tossing it in a bag in its place.
There are the Anis we talked about last time. That should more than cover things.
And who says I intend on letting that thing leave this place, Lefty? Just because you are in need of it?
Yeah, that is exactly why.
The grin on his face could not completely hide the seriousness that his eyes were holding. He might actually try to run with it if I made him. Oh, well then, I chuckled. The trade is fair, but do not come to me if that thing becomes an issue. I did not condone their replication in the first place. They were meant to be a unique pair.
Don't worry. No one will know where I got it. Of that, you have my word. Hell, no one will know that I had a part in it if I do my job right.
Lefty's word was worth more than the bag of Honey Christie had tossed on the table, and I smiled and nodded as he made to leave. Lefty, be careful.
Always, Jackson. Always.
I was in high spirits, despite the aches in my body. As I packed the last of my personal effects, I couldn't help but smile sadly. This room had served as my home for the last 5 years, save for the occasion in the first 2 where I went home for the holidays. 5 years. It had passed so quickly now that it was over. And I was only starting to realize how much had happened, how much I had changed in all those years. After my success in the Undercity, as haphazard and luck-based as it was, I had met with the regent of the home city, as the divine leaders of the Dragwa were away attending to godly affairs at the time, or so I was told. It had only been on the long ride up the lift that I realized something was wrong. When my brothers and I had entered the Undercity, there had been no less than 3 months until the date of my birth. However, when I arrived, the Regent informed me that temporal displacements are not unknown to the Undercity, and I had been fortunate to make it out, no matter the means or circumstances. Losing a few months was a cheap cost for such glory, even if it went unspoken, I was assured several times. However, my brothers had left after waiting for nearly a month for me, and were no doubt back and preparing to go to Tranus, as they had both received a scholarship for their own successes within the Undercity. The Regent informed me I too would be receiving a similar scholarship. However, I would also be receiving additional courses of a personalized nature. I was assured that these would only be part of my reward for my grand success in the Undercity. However, my only concern was getting home, and for that, the Regent was able to summon one of the court archmages to send me home with their magics. The reunion when I arrived was both joyous, loud, and raucous, and lasted for 3 days. My brothers taking great joy in filling me in on everything that had passed in the time that I had been separated from them. We then spent the last few months before leaving for Tranus helping Chanlos, Ogman, and Miska get everything settled for maintaining the farm while we were gone. The praetor that had slain the Knight of Rotwood, Nov Davez, had made a habit of visiting regularly as he roamed the plains of the lawless lands of Solaris, lending aid as needed, and his regular visits helped greatly in keeping the Celestians informed and ready for any threats or other events of note. By the time we had left for Tranus on our transport ship, we had left things with the farm better off than I ever thought we could have actually achieved. Chanlos piloted the ship, as he would be stopping on the way back after dropping us off to deliver a selection of crops and other goods to various dealers in Domnitra. The output of our fields and the fact that we had been able to plant, maintain, and harvest such large quantities and expansive quantities of various foodstuffs in the first place allowed us to sell in bulk to multiple parties. The funds and profits from these sales had been planned out as to the projects and aims for our home. By all our guesses and estimates, by the time we graduated, we would be having the infrastructure and other necessities built for the eventual expansion of our lands and the services we plan to offer our local region. However, I had not gone home in 3 years, and I was exactly unsure of how far along everything was. The brothers themselves rarely spoke of those things when they returned from holidays, mostly passing on stories and well wishes from the Celestians, and tales of adventures or exciting tidbits from the year. In fact, I think that might be why they were so anxious to get home before I did. They'd finished with their final exams and such and graduated a full week before me, and almost immediately made for home on the first airship heading south. They said they wanted to ensure that everything was perfect for my arrival. The sound of metal on stone from just outside my room's door snapped me from my thoughts as I turned and saw the tall form of Professor Kanar, a living statue of an NLR, and one of my most harsh but fair instructors. It was he who had arranged and oversaw the Combined Force Personal Combat exam my brothers and I had completed a week ago. It had been the last test for Justique and Lawson, after which they were full 5-year grads of Tranus. I, however, had other tests to take, and although none of them compared to the fight this pile of over-enchanted metal had arranged. He looked at me with an expression that I wasn't familiar with, and then he spoke, not with the harsh tones of an instructor like I was used to, but with warmth and respect. You're moving well for the beating you took. Thanks. Any chance I can finally get an answer to the question about who in the realms you threw at us? We may have made him bleed, and granted you said that was all that we needed to do. But I am not a fool, and there is no way after all that you and the other instructors have taught me that I actually believe I got that kick into his jaw honestly. Whoever he was too fast and way too skilled for such a petulant and spiteful kick to actually have landed. So, now that I'm leaving, who is he? And why did he let me kick him? Professor Kanar looked at me rather seriously. Well, damn. Your brothers are under the impression that you surprised him and got that kick in fair. But you are saying that he let you get it in. And you are right, of course. I forced my face to go to a cold, neutral expression, as I focused to contain the anger and rage those words conjured. As to who he is, and why he might let you get that strike in, I can tell you this. He is an old instructor whose expertise has been called away to other tasks for many, many years. And the fact he was available to serve as your evaluator was a thing of serendipity. Why he let you hit him is easy. You earned it. There may not be a more prideful man that has ever been an instructor, but I guarantee from the onset of the exam, he had already determined exactly how hard he would fight. As again, you are spot on, he's far more capable than he showed. But this was not his test. It was yours and your brother's. You won. And in battle, that is all that matters. I took a long moment, both to calm myself and process the greater implications of both the answer and the presence of one of the most aloof professors themselves. Alright. All that being said, Professor, are you here to make sure I'm actually leaving? Despite your enhanced curriculum, you have had plenty of time to go home in the past 3 years. Instead, you have stayed and took even more classes. Such drive should be commended. And tempered. His gaze felt oddly lighter than when he was teaching, but it did feel as he was trying to impress one final lesson upon me. But that is not why I am here. You, Lord Katheon, have received a request for a meeting. One I would advise you to decline. Who? And why? The professor was not known for giving out advice, at least not of a class or war-based favor. The who is Domnitra, and the why is very simple. He gestured to my bracer. They have always been very focused on obtaining or recovering any items of ancient auratic providence. While I do not believe that they would be so bold as to actually try to take it from you, I believe it would be better for all, and you especially, if they never had the chance to see you with it. That is all. I took a moment to mull this over. The point was solid. Are you aware of what they want with me? If I had to guess, I would propose they are looking to fortify relations with one of the largest and strongest independent strongpoints in the northern parts of the plains. I couldn't help but smile. While I was not aware of the details, I knew that the Celestians would have been nothing if not busy and diligent to the plans and goals we had set. Either way, you should make them come to you, Katheon, both to be on better ground for negotiations and better ground for any shenanigans that may occur. Well, it's gonna cost to book passage on a transport that doesn't stop with Denitra on the way? Professor Kennard just smiled as if I had told a joke. That would be the other reason for my arrival. When you have finished packed and are ready, please make your way to Air Dock 36. I am informed you will find the final part of your Undercity spoils there. I took a sharp breath. I had forgotten that there was anything outstanding on that account. Anyways, Katheon, it has been an honor to be your instructor. By the 9 and 4, may you find nothing but victory, Katheon Leonth. With that, he turned and walked away, disappearing in a soft pop. I made my way to the air dock with some speed, as I was now eager to see what awaited for me there. I was not disappointed, as a smaller yet roomy transport sat moored at the dock. Made of metal, possibly meteor iron. It was a personal transport, and looked almost brand new. The dockmaster came over and handed me a small box that held the keys and instructions for the craft.
Looks to be a fine craft, freshly built and delivered not a week ago,
was all he said before moving on to deal with another matter. Boarding the transport and opening the box, I followed the included instructions to power up the craft and maneuver it out of the dock, before setting a course and allowing the onboard systems to take control of the craft and begin the flight home. I stepped from the control room into the passenger compartment, setting my bags, spear, and blade aside as I walked around the cabin and examined my new craft. Comfortable, roomy, and with a bar. After a bit, I poured myself a drink and sat down to read the letter and other materials included with the keys. The letter read as follows.
Dear Lord Katheon Leonth, let it be known by decree and instruction of the divine rulers of the home city that by your acts of strength, bravery, and your survival instincts, you have obtained a feat that few among the wise or ageless have, and have proven yourself deserving of recognition and reward. Your education has been but one of these rewards. With that now complete, it has been decided by the divine blade and chain that you should have a vessel worthy of your potential, with which to find and explore your fate and destiny. Therefore, this vessel was commissioned for you, and to standards dictated by the divine lords of the home city themselves. May it bear you safely to the bright future that you are most assuredly headed to. Sincerely, Regent Thronewatch of the home city. The small tome included was an extensive manual for repair, maintenance, as well as potential customizations. The book itself was magical, having many more pages than it would have appeared from the outside, and it took me quite a while to skim through it. Having emptied my glass, I stood to refill it. Walking to the bar and pouring myself a fresh drink, I set the glass down and slowed as I felt and heard a faint pop from behind me. I spun on my heel more on instinct than anything, and had drawn my pistol almost clear of its holster by the time I had spotted someone in a chair in the corner of my sight. 5 years of reflexes did the rest, and I snapped off a pair of shots at the intruder. Trails of smoke rose behind the head of the man sitting in the chair, dressed in a plain white suit, and he just smiled as he addressed me.
Quite a reflexes. I guess we shouldn't expect anything less of a 5th-year grad.
He stopped as he noticed that I hadn't lowered my gun. He reached into his jacket, and I fired again before he could draw his own weapon. But he didn't draw a weapon. He simply placed his hand in the way of the blast, and I watched it strike and detonate and leave no mark upon his hand. Perhaps that was a bit foolish of me, but as you can see, your blasts aren't going to help. He taunted as I flipped the switch on my sidearm and fired again. This time, a ballistic round that came out and struck his outstretched hand, and whatever protection he had against energy blast did not apparently carry over to a solid slug, and his hand exploded in a squall of blood and viscera. To the man's credit, he only grimaced and watched at the destruction of his hand, and then he winked. At that, everything, and I mean everything, froze. The smoke on the end of my weapon, the reddish-pink mist that was this man's hand, everything except the man himself, who stood and took a few steps towards me. His hand regrew itself in 2 steps, and I began to wonder just how my body would be discovered. Would my brothers ever know? However, the man did not attack me. Instead, he walked past me and poured himself a drink, picked up my glass, and took our glasses over to the chairs, setting them down. And then he looked at me purposefully. And that is what we call hubris, and a painful reminder of it as well. He softly chuckled before waving his regenerated hand, and all the smoke, gore, and other signs of violence were all gone. Now, please sit, Lord Katheon. We have things to discuss. I found I could move again, and stowed my weapon and sat down, angry. You invade my privacy, make a mockery of me, and then expect to treat with me? The man looked at me with a passive face as he formed his response. You chose to refuse my invitation, even though it would not have been more than an hour or 2 added to your trip. I even timed it for when you were going home for your convenience. I took a moment to consider this. If I cannot decline, is it an invitation or a summons? He smiled warmly. Good point. Perhaps I should have been more blunt in my missive. However, I am here, and we can get on with discussing how Dom Nitra and your quickly forming community can work together for the benefit of all. I lifted my glass and took a slow pull. Everything was going to plan, it seemed. I set down my glass, fixed him with a fair, even stare, and asked, Your name and position, good sir. I will not treat with someone who I do not know. He smiled even wider. Lord Riesden, advisor to the Emperor of the Flameford, region of Dom Nitra. But please, call me Ari. Less than 2 hours later, and as my transport was starting its descent to land, Ari stood after shaking my hand on a set of terms. To be honest, I actually thought it would have been a tougher negotiation. However, it was clear that Ari, and by extension Dom Nitra, were far more interested in the force projection that came with an agreement with us than what it would cost. And I am proud to say that without being exceptionally greedy, I managed to guarantee terms that would see our plans accelerated immensely. Ari looked at me with a smile. Done and done. I am happy to have had the chance to meet with you, Lord Katheon. Unfortunately, it will most likely be the last time. My duties are many, and even these few hours spent here with you are going to cost me mountains of paperwork. He laughed. The greatest mystic art of them all, able to bring entire kingdoms low and slow even the NLR. I seemed confused, and he fixed me with an even, serious stare. Would you like to know what it is, Katheon? Would you like to know the name of the power that I wield? I nodded, eager to hear what force had allowed him to pull off the tricks I had seen when he arrived on my ship. With a wide smile, he came close. Bureaumancy, young Katheon. Bureaumancy. And with a laugh, his joke told, he faded away in that same pop that had heralded his arrival. As my craft set down and I gathered my things, I prepared myself for the next stage of life. I had a long list of things that were going to need to get done, and establishing a strong base of operations set within a stronger local community gathered from those that wished to see these aims actualized was the first of those things to get done. The deal I had just struck moved things along as much as a decade faster than they should be, and I was eager to share this news with my brother and the others.